Thou shalt not steal, unless commanded to do so. Let me explain these words. Slaves own nothing, because they are slaves. Slaves are the commodity that is owned. In these words we find the dilemma to a question that no Christian ever asks. Where did the slaves that left Egypt with Moses get this vast amount of gold and silver that were used for the golden bull, the construction of the tabernacle and all its furniture, including the Ark of the Covenant? Slaves are not supposed to own any gold or silver, yet the biblical Egyptian ex-slaves had an enormous amount of it. Nobody asked the question, where did the slaves get it? The Bible tells you exactly where the gold and silver came from, but no church will ever mention it. They won't, because it will expose the largest fraud and theft ever committed in biblical times. It's one of those veiled, unspoken Christian secrets. It's a secret because to mention it can open an enigma and cause the sheeple to ask questions. The following 2 verses gives us just a glimpse of how much gold and silver the slaves had, and how much was used for the construction of the tabernacle and its furniture. Verse number 1, the gold used for the tabernacle and its furniture. Exodus chapter 38 verse 24. All the gold that was used for the work, in all the construction of the sanctuary, the gold from the offering, was 29 talents and 730 shekels. Verse number 2, the silver used for the tabernacle. Exodus chapter 38 verse 25. The silver obtained from those of the community who were counted in the census was 100 talents and 1,775 shekels. Right before the killings of the firstborn, that is the commencement of the 10th plague in Egypt, Moses was given a specific instruction. We know who commanded Moses, so we know who gave the order for what was about to happen. Moses was commanded to tell the people what they, the slaves, must do the day before the killing of all the Egyptian firstborn. Moses was ordered to tell the people the following, and I quote directly from the Bible. Exodus chapter 11 verse 2. Speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man borrow from his neighbor, and every woman from her neighbor, jewels of silver and jewels of gold. The slaves were told to beg, borrow and steal everything they could from the Egyptians, including gold and silver. We find a repetition of this instruction in chapter 12, and I quote. Exodus chapter 12 verse 35. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold. When the slaves said they only want to borrow the articles of gold and silver from the Egyptians, the intention was actually to commit premeditated theft on a grand scale. The plan for this fraud and then theft did not come from the slaves. It came via Moses, but directly from his controller. This massive fraud and theft was all carefully planned by the plotter, who had no intention that the slaves will ever give the borrowed articles back. The plotter knew that Pharaoh and all the Egyptians would almost certainly chase the slaves out of Egypt the morning after the killing of their firstborn. The plotter also knew that when this happens, all the borrowed gold and silver will still be in the possession of the slaves. It was premeditated theft on a grand scale, commanded by the plotter, initiated by Moses and executed by the slaves. This was all done to accumulate as much gold and silver as possible, as quickly as possible, before the great exodus of the slaves from Egypt. Exodus 3 verse 22 described perfectly what actually happened, and I quote. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters. And so you will plunder the Egyptians. The planner of this nationwide fraud and theft had a future purpose in mind for all that gold and silver. But no matter how you look at it, neither Moses nor the slaves planned it. If they did not plan this heist, then who did? It's up to you to decide. If the origins of this immense amount of gold and silver at the disposal of the slaves were an eye-opener for you, like, share, subscribe and please donate to this channel via PayPal.